Imagine this for a second. You're a BCBA who's finally made it. You have a full caseload, you supervise a team, you're clocking 30 hours of billable time a week, plus you're doing your paperwork and parent meetings. At first, it feels like success, but then the cracks start showing. You stop feeling excited about client wins. You catch yourself zoning out in supervision, and Sundays kind of start to fill you with dread. It hits you one day when you're writing yet another behavior intervention plan. You're not just tired, you're completely empty. This was very real for a colleague of mine. Let's call her Jamie. Jamie loved ABA. She loved supporting autistic clients and building autonomy, but the system demanded more than she could give. And eventually she almost walked away for good. So, what changed? Jamie didn't just tough it out. She recognized her burnout as a systemic problem and not as a personal weakness. She advocated for a smaller caseload. She sought out mentorship, therapy, and trauma informed supervision training. Most importantly, she connected with the values that made her want to be a behavior analyst in the first place: dignity, respect, and autonomy for every human that she served. Now, Jamie leads a team that prioritizes practitioner well being as much as client outcomes because she knows firsthand that burned out BCBAs can't light the way for others. Today, we're going to dive into how burnout impacts not just individuals, but the entire field of ABA and what we can do about it. Welcome back to Action Insights, the intersection of ABA and mental health. I am one of your co-hosts, Amelia Dalphonse, and this is my co-host,
Nikki Diane.
And today we're going to talk about burnout. So before we jump into the topic, I want to let you know that you can get CEUs for listening to this podcast. You can get half a CEU. There will be 3 code words that you will need to write down. And the link to purchase the CEUs for just $5 will be in the description. So make sure to listen for those 3 code words and write them down. And your first code word is burnout.
Thanks, Amy. So as Amy said, we're talking about burnout today. I always like to give a couple heads up disclaimers maybe when we talk about this topic, because I think that in all of the trainings and talks and supervision that I've done, burnout is a very real experience that a lot of people could be feeling right now. And so we will not cover everything about burnout today, but we're giving a foundation. We will talk more about this because I think it's just so important that we have open conversations about the things that impact us in our jobs and in doing the best work that we can. The second piece is that I like to separate out burnout from compassion fatigue. So we are not speaking about compassion fatigue today. Compassion fatigue is where we experience, emotions in a situation where we see somebody suffering and we try to alleviate that suffering. And compassion fatigue occurs when we have a lot of clients that's happening with, where there's significant trauma, in our client and family's history, or our own trauma that starts to, kind of come to the table. And that is more living in compassion fatigue. So for today, we're talking about burnout. Burnout is defined as a state of emotional, physical, and mental exhaustion caused by prolonged and excessive stress. It actually has some diagnostic placement in the medical manual, the ICD-10, because of the significant emotional, physical, and kind of mental exhaustion that does occur. It can cause physical symptoms, and people can feel physically unwell when they experience prolonged burnout. There are a couple of key components about burnout that I think are important for us to talk about. Before I do that, here's my hope statement. This is why we do these podcasts, is that burnout is not inevitable. So just because we work in a field that has high demands and we are working with possible consumers or clients that, come in with trauma histories and all of the things, it doesn't mean that we just have to expect that we're going to feel burnout. because when we do some proactive strategies, we actually can mitigate it. And if we are feeling burnout, it can get better. So I always say that because I'm going to talk about the sad, parts of burnout. And like when I do that, you can watch like the energy, like in a room kind of decrease. But burnout is not inevitable. And if you are experiencing burnout, it can get better. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a few minutes. So the key components of burnout are emotional exhaustion. So this is where you might feel drained, depleted, but for a prolonged period of time. So this isn't that I'm just experiencing a Monday and I'm a little more tired today because I did lots of stuff on the weekend, but on a Tuesday, like I feel a little bit better. This is like an ongoing, prolonged feeling of emotional exhaustion. The second part is what's called depersonalization. And I always like to separate this out because some people will ask, like, derealization is also a word. So depersonalization is where we feel a sense of detachment from ourselves, almost like we're an observer to our thoughts and our feelings and what our body's experiencing, like we feel a little bit separated. Derealization is a feeling of detachment from like the world. So we're not necessarily talking about that today. That lives kind of more in more in-depth mental health conversations that we might have later. But we're talking about depersonalization. So you almost feel like you're a witness or an observer to what, your body and feelings and thoughts are having. And the other piece, or the third piece, is what's kind of considered as reduced personal accomplishment. The other language that you might see is looking at reduced feelings of self-efficacy, where we start to feel really ineffective in the work that we're doing. And we start to question our own personal impact, right? Like I always think that we get into this field for a reason. Most of us are here to help others. We have a strong belief system and value in how we approach our clients and the services that we're delivering. And our goals are to improve quality of life and skills for the people that we're supporting. When we start to feel like we are not effective or we question our impact, it might be a sign that we're not feeling a lot of efficacy in our job. And that might be a like kind of an early warning sign that we're heading into burnout. I think it's important to recognize that burnout is not a personal failure. It's usually a predictable response to a system that is not sustainable. It's hard not to feel like it's like when I've been burnt out in the past, which I haven't, it's hard not to feel like it's a me issue. I need to do more. I need to fix it. I need to just go to work and just do the things that they're asking me to. When I start to think about, are the expectations unrealistic? Do the values of the place that I'm working or the job that I'm doing align with the values that are important to me? It starts to broaden it out to be a more kind of systemic contribution or systemic problem.
Yeah, I definitely can relate to the values misalignment and leading to burnout, because definitely a lot of you have heard my stories before, but in moving to Florida, I experienced a lot of values misalignment in the roles that I was in. And it doesn't take long. If your values don't align with the work that you're doing, you're going to feel burnout real fast.
Yeah. And I haven't shared as much of my personal story. I don't know. Amy, you do so many, like you're out there. So here's kind of where I jump in on this, is that for me, I feel a lot of compassion fatigue in and out, around my client care and the work that I do. When I have felt burnout and I assess where it's coming from, for me personally, it never comes from the care that I'm providing clients or consumers and families. It comes from my values not aligning with the type of supervision I'm receiving, or the resources I have access to, or the expectations that are being set up for me within the system or the agency or organization that I am working for. For me, that's always an important distinction, because otherwise I start to be like, am I having any value to the people I'm working for or with or providing services to? And my answer is always yes. Not that I don't reflect and improve over time. Usually the burnout comes from, what I feel, if I feel undervalued or feel like, I just can't meet my expectations within the system that I'm working in.
For sure. That's always been the challenge, has been the values of the companies don't align with my values, certainly not the client care, but the expectations of the role, the focus on billable hours over client care, I was a clinical director, and the expectations of the company was that I prioritize clients who had private insurance over clients who had Medicaid on the wait list. I won't do that. You can't, that's just not something that I'm going to do, because whoever was first on the wait list is next to get services, in my opinion, regardless of their funder.
I know as you're talking, I just think, so I work for myself now, which has been many years leading to that place. And a value for me is equal care to anyone who walks in. And if there are barriers to that, then how do we problem solve it? Right. And so because I work for myself, I get to do all the things, the fun things I want to. But I could imagine being in that position where a certain kind of demographic or a certain, kind of access to care or payer is determining like how we kind of triage people in or how we take people in off a wait list, can be really hard. And when we start to talk about values, especially when I haven't supervised in a little bit, like a lot of people, but I would talk with staff around like, what are your values? What are your goals? Like, what's a good fit for you in your job? And we would really kind of work on that through supervision. And a lot of people would come in and say like, my values, I don't know what you mean by that. Right. So like kind of, I know we'll get to this in a bit, but like anyone who's listening, I encourage you to start thinking about what are your values in your job? Because that can really, bump into burnout if we aren't even aware of what our values are, but we're still feeling, like we're working in a system that isn't supportive of them.
Yeah, and I think that that's a lot of what happens, because we tend to think of our job as our service to the clients, and not necessarily all of the different aspects of our role. And we often don't see the misalignment until it's too late.
Yeah, it's kind of we talked about in our last episode where like things become a problem, where they become an issue, and then we are like, oh, this is an issue, and then we reactively kind of deal with it. And our hope for today for anyone listening is that we start to think proactively, right, of how to be aware of these things that might lead to burnout, which can look different for every single person. And this is, for me, the mental health piece that I always like to pull in for burnout is that we aren't just cogs in a wheel, right? We are people who come in with our own histories and our own emotions and our own values and our own goals. And it's important to recognize that, because when we feel burnt out, our mental health starts to be impacted. So there's an impact on us, right, as a provider. There's also an impact on client outcomes. When we are burnt out, we're less likely to provide fidelity to interventions or behavior plans. It's harder to show up authentically as my best self, right? Like if I meet a new client or, I'm building rapport, burnout really can impact that, because emotionally, remember that exhaustion piece, it's hard for me to kind of bring my my best self to the table. And then it also impacts the field of ABA as a whole, right? So I don't know what the statistics are. Maybe I don't know if you do, Amy, but I wonder in the last few years, like how many BCBAs, RBTs, behavior techs, right, have left the field completely because of burnout and because of the mental health symptoms that come with that, which are usually anxiety, depression, secondary traumatic stress can happen, right? Like all of these things can be a part of why people leave the field. I'm not sure if there's, I don't know off the top of my head, but I'm curious to think about, how many people may have left the field, really good providers, really, great people who are now doing something completely different because of burnout.
Yeah, and the statistics are, there are multiple different sources of statistics, and I don't remember um specifically where we found them before, but the burnout rate is really high. It's something around 50 to 80% or something
Yeah.
like that of ABA professionals who experience burnout.
Mhm.
And I mean, that's just not, that makes the field unsustainable. And I see all the time in Facebook groups, BCBAs talking about what they can do. and their solution is almost always to leave the field. But so what's happening is that we're getting these really great ABA professionals in our field who are becoming burnt out and leaving the field. And what is that leaving us with?
Either not enough people or people who are maybe not, don't have the skills or the training or the access to supports, to provide that same level of care. And the hard part is that most people don't just start to feel burnt out and leave the fields, right? So most people will start to feel burned out and then they try to fix it. Once you realize it, we try to fix those things, right? If it's important for us to stay in a place that we believe is important, like working for, in ABA, it's when those things don't shift, right? Or we don't get the support we need, that people will leave a job and go to another place. Or if they've done that a couple times, will leave the field. So it's not that there's a lack of attempting to address burnout and make it better. It's the lack of change and shifting that the culture sometimes in systems that contribute to people leaving the field. And, so when we think about what that means, that kind of looks at like organizations, supervisors, like how are we addressing burnout kind of proactively, and repairing and shifting the things that we need to help staff feel okay in their jobs.
Right. And the leadership team, they're often feeling the burnout as well. And so it can be hard when you're a leader in an organization trying to support staff who are feeling burnt out, but you're also experiencing similar feelings. And so it's hard to show up with that compassion, which happens to be our second code word. Our second code word is compassion. So make sure you write that down or use a voice memo to make a note if you're listening to this while you're driving. But the second code word is compassion.
I think something that we miss too, and we talk a lot about this in compassion fatigue, but I don't think it always gets pulled into the burnout conversations, is the self-compassion piece and like the compassion for others. Because when we're burnt out, it's hard to, again, like that emotional exhaustion kind of, other emotions for people kind of build in. You can see more anger or irritability or what looks like less care, right? And there's the compassion between people, but also the self-compassion of normalizing the experience, right? What is that? That's the common humanity part of self-compassion. Like I am, like other people may be experiencing this too, and I'm not alone. And how do we kind of bring that to the table in both of those ways?
Yeah, I think that that's important for us to consider. I do want to make sure that we leave enough time for us to discuss strategies for everyone, because we can talk about burnout all day long. And we've done another training about burnout, and where we dug a little bit deeper into it. But I think it's important that we leave this episode with some strategies if people are experiencing burnout. And there are things that people can do on an individual level. One of Nikki's all-time most recommended strategies is to engage in self-reflection. You want to make sure that you're regularly allowing time to reflect on your current work experience and whether your current role aligns with your values and whether or not it feels sustainable to you. And there's no harm in looking at it, but it can be really uncomfortable, because if you're working in an organization and you want to keep earning that income, it can feel hard to now look at it and think that maybe it doesn't align. But there are ways. Some companies are willing to work with you around things like job crafting. And this is something that I used to do, especially with my RBTs. I would talk to them a lot about what what they want out of their day. What are the activities that an RBT engages in on a regular basis that they want to do more of? And what are the things that they really don't like to do? You know, and you could talk to BCBAs similarly. And not that you can eliminate all of the things that they don't want to do, because sometimes that just, I mean, you have to do it. Things like treatment plans have to be done by the providing BCBA. So you can't take that away from them. But perhaps there are other parts of their role that they could shift, or are there other responsibilities that they might want to assume that will make them feel more invested in their role, or help them feel like they're making a bigger contribution. And I've been providing some consultation to a business owner here in Florida, and we've been talking about her doing this with one of her staff. He really wants to be providing, he's a BCBA, and he wants to be providing more training. And so if she can work with him around ways to provide staff training, and she's talking about implementing a parent training program within her organization. And I could see him just taking the reins of that and being kind of the champion of that program. And even though that increases his workload, it also increases his sense of fulfillment in his role.
Yeah. And it makes it more reinforcing to show up to work, right? When we get to do the things that we enjoy doing. And I think, self-reflection is, Amy was right. It's my number one thing. If we engage in ongoing, consistent self-reflection, which is a skill. So it's not like people just like are born self-reflecting, right? It's a soft skill, and how to learn how to engage in self-reflection. We catch things a lot sooner, right? Because we're having this kind of ongoing assessment of ourselves in our job, or ourselves in our personal life, or however you're using reflection. It gives us information earlier. So then we can do interventions earlier, instead of not thinking about it at all and then ending up, in a place where we're reactive. And as you were talking, one question I used to ask staff is like, let's pretend like unicorn day. Like, what would your day need to look like for you to go home and be like, that was a great day, right? Like, I feel really good about myself at work today, or there were some, maybe there were some bumps, but like, I feel really proud of, or I feel really confident, or I feel really supported about what happened in my day. And you start to kind of look at job crafting in that way. And we can do that for ourselves. We can do that as supervisors with others. But it's really starting to integrate, right, in a proactive way of like, what is important to you in the place that you're in now.
Yeah. And so much of the conversation around burnout talks about setting those boundaries and protecting your personal time, which is an important thing. And there's so many recommendations: take a bubble bath, or read a book, or go for a walk. And the reality is that most of us do understand that piece of it. Most of us know that there are certain activities that we enjoy, and we should be taking the time to do that. So I really appreciate our conversation when we can focus on things that aren't talked about all that much. And job crafting is one of those things that I think is manageable. And I think it should be more available in the workplace. And I think more companies need to become flexible with this and work with their staff around how can they create additional opportunities for staff to engage in activities that are motivating for them. When I was a clinical director, one of my favorite days ever was when I was providing training. We had a group of preschool teachers come to the clinic, and I provided training around how they can utilize some ABA strategies in their preschool classroom. And the day really was just a disaster on so many levels, because we had all of these behaviors happening over there. And I mean, it's chaos in a clinic, and all of these preschool teachers are there watching us kind of not be as smooth and effective as maybe we would want to present, but that's reality, and that's their classroom experience as well. So they really appreciated the chaos that they walked into on that given day.
Yeah.
And it was just the most fun. And if I could spend my day doing more of those activities, that would really reduce burnout. So even though I'm doing more work, because that day was probably the most work, it's definitely the most talking I have ever done in a single work day. And it is probably the most work that I have ever done in my professional career. But it still stands out as the best day of my professional career. And so if we can create more of those moments for our staff and for ourselves, there's an element of advocacy that needs to be going on. If you're in a leadership role, and all BCBAs are in some type of leadership role, you are supervising staff. So you can advocate for the RBTs to be doing some of the things that they want to be doing.
Yeah. And, this isn't something that is always easy either, right? Like thinking about like, just go identify this or do these things. These things take effort. And so a lot of times I will go to trainings and I'll train about burnout, and inevitably somebody will raise their hand and say like, well, what do I do if I'm already burnt out? Which takes so much bravery when I'm training within organizations for somebody to say that in front of their supervisors and peers, right? And they're not the only one who's feeling that way, and I always ask to what you said before, Amy, like, I'll be like, has anyone ever gone to a burnout training and they say the fix is self-care, and everyone's like, and I'll say self-care is important. It's not what really truly addresses burnout. It's important to take care of yourself. But if you're feeling high levels of emotional exhaustion, the likelihood of you starting a new hobby or routine is less. It doesn't mean it won't happen, but it's like less likely because you don't have the energy or the emotional kind of like space to do that. So I will say, if anyone's listening, they're like, hey, Nikki, even though I can't see you, what if I'm already burnt out? My recommendation that I always make in trainings is the first place to start is to start thinking about what your values are. And Amy, if you disagree, like, please let me know. Because without understanding what's important to you in the place that you're working, it is hard to do job crafting. It's hard to advocate for yourself. It's hard to set boundaries. It's hard to know what would make your best day ever, right? Because we're not really aware of what our values might be. So if I were to say to start anywhere is where your values are. If you're a supervisor or in leadership and a staff comes to you and they say, I'm burnt out, the first place is validation. Right? It's not, give it a few days, it'll get better. Why don't you take a day off? That will help, which it might, but it's not going to fix the burnout. So the first place is validation, and the second place is values work. And the ACT principles and matrix and all that stuff is like a really good place to go to have some like guidelines and like, formatting to start to do some values work. And Amy is very well versed in the matrix, but so if somebody, but that's where I would just kind of live. I don't know if you have a different thought, Amy, about those recommendations of where to start.
No, I think that those are great places to start. The ACT Matrix is one of my favorite tools to use on my own or with staff. And that's a great way to work through kind of what they're going through and experiencing right now, but also where they could go in the future. And I think the biggest thing is to do what you can to be flexible in an unflexible system.
Yeah.
So if you're working in an organization that isn't going to flex to allow for you to do more of the activities that you want to do, or if your values don't align with that organization, it's really important for you to consider what your options are, because you do have a lot of options. And I feel for anyone who feels trapped, because I've been trapped in a company that doesn't align with my values. And I stayed for a year and a half, way longer than I should have, but I felt like I needed to protect my clients and their families. But inevitably my plan had been to get out. So just keep that in mind, that there are options for you and that you are not trapped in any of the positions that you're in.
Yeah, and I think that's so valuable because if you are doing the work and you are doing your values work and identifying boundaries and you're still butting up against something that isn't meeting them, right? Then it's good that you've done the work, but you want what you're doing to be sustainable. So that's our third code word, is sustainable. So our third code word is sustainable. But you want whatever you're doing to not just kind of be these ups and downs where, oh, I'm burnt out, I do the things, now I feel better. Oh, I'm burnt out, the system isn't changing. Oh, well, like we have a lot of option. It doesn't mean it's easy. It doesn't mean it will happen right away, but this work allows us to kind of keep almost like our finger on the pulse of where our values are or aren't aligning within the environment that we are working in. And I think that I just go back to what I said before, like burnout, is a very common thing that a lot of people experience. And it also is something that is not like a personal failing. So I just look like, I just kind of want to leave us there that burnout is not a personal failing. It is something that a lot of people experience, and it's not inevitable. And there are ways that we can come back from burnout, whether that looks at values, boundaries, or kind of thinking about where we're working. And I know that we could talk forever and ever, but stay tuned for more episodes on burnout and compassion fatigue, because I think it's so important to talk about.
It is. And our next episode is going to be on what to do after burnout. So make sure to tune in for that, because that's a really important conversation. Thank you all for joining us today on Action Insights, the intersection of ABA and mental health. And we'll see you next time.
Thanks, everyone.